She has studied in the UK and is a well-known corporate lawyer in Tanzania. Fatma Karume is the daughter of former Zanzibar President Amani Abeid Karume. She is also the former president of the Tanganyika Law Society, the National Bar Association that has been in existence since 1954, when the country was part of the British Empire known as Tanganyika. Fatma is also the granddaughter of the founding president of Zanzibar. The High Court of Tanzania recently overturned the decision of the Advocate Ethics Committee that banned her from practicing on mainland Tanzania. Many now believe that this is an opportunity for Fatma to defend herself in court, but is this really the case? We managed to speak to Fatma Karume about different issues that pertain her country, from human rights violations to media freedom, and to her feeling that the executive is consistently interfering with the freedom of the judicial system in her country. Fatma, it's so good to have you on Mwanzo TV today. I mean, looking at your career, you are a corporate lawyer, but it appears to some that you are more of a human rights lawyer because of your passion for human rights. I mean, what happened that you are more prominent as far as human rights defending is concerned?
I don't think I'm more prominent with respect to human rights defending. I mean, I've been practicing for the last 25 years. And in my career at the bar in Tanzania, I think since 2004, I have had a reported case almost every year. And in 1 year, I believe I had 2 of my cases reported in the East African law reports. And all these are sort of corporate cases, tax cases, or cases with respect to fair competition. So I'm extremely well known in the corporate field. I think my position in human rights, it's a question of really the optics. And in Tanzania, human rights in the last 5 years have been abused. And because I spoke out, those are probably the reasons why I appear to be more well known in human rights, but it's only optics. Actually, the amount of work I've done in corporate is a lot more, and I'm far well known for that.
You mentioned about your passion for defending human rights in your country. When you look at the state of violation of human rights in your country, what will be your thoughts?
We have been through a horrendous 5 years of human rights violations. We've had a repressive regime, extremely oppressive. Individual rights were not guaranteed. The courts shied away from protecting individuals. In fact, the courts were used to dehumanize, and they were very much politicized to dehumanize individuals. And it was a time which was tragic for a lot of us who believe in rule of law, democracy, and human rights. I didn't think that in 5 years there would be such erosion of institutions and in our fundamental rights. It happened so quickly, and so I don't know what word I can use to describe, but it was so quickly and so deeply entrenched that it's frightening. And I worry that we could easily go back to that.
Most recently, the High Court of Tanzania overturned the decision of the Advocate Ethics Committee that banned you from practicing on mainland Tanzania. I mean, this decision, many people believe, is your opportunity to defend yourself. But really, I want to hear from you. What does this decision mean to you?
What the High Court did, the 3 judges of the High Court said that the decision of the Advocates Committee was unlawful because the Advocates Committee had no jurisdiction to determine my case, given the fact that it was the Attorney General who had gone before the Advocates Committee when he had actually already complained about me to a judge. A judge had already made a decision to suspend me temporarily, and the judge has decided that the registrar of the High Court should take me to the Advocates Committee. Now, the Attorney General got so excited, he couldn't wait for the registrar to take me to the Advocates Committee. He decided to do it himself for the second time, which is quite shocking. But anyway, it is what it is. The reason, so my view about the whole thing is I find it really odd that the High Court should say, well, the Advocates Committee was wrong. Remember that I've been punished now for 2 years. And the High Court is then saying, oh, well, you know what? I think you should take another go at her. You've punished her. You've wrongly punished her for 2 years. We can have another go at her. Go and punish her for another 2 years. And so this could go on for an eternity. They could be punishing me wrongly for the next 30 years. I don't know. None of it makes sense to me. But it is what it is. It is not the justice system. It's the manner in which justice is meted out in Tanzania, extremely inequitably.
So do you see this overturning of the decision as an opportunity for you to defend yourself now?
Well, how many times do they want me to defend myself? I've been punished already. That's the point. I think the point is it's not about opportunity to defend myself. They have punished me already for 2 years. The High Court is now saying, go punish her properly now for the second time or the third time or however many times they want to punish me. So the point is this: how many times is someone allowed to take a shot at you and hurt you? They hurt me illegally first time, second time, and now they're given a third time to take a shot. Time to take a shot at me? Come on! I think it's ludicrous. And so basically, my point, Leah, is this: they could be taking shots at me forever illegally. So they can take another shot at me, and then I go back to the High Court and say, this has been illegal too. And the High Court will say, yes, it was illegal 2 years later. Take another shot at her. This could go on forever.
Well, we do know that the High Court has ordered the registrar to refer the complaints to the same committee that had put you to task. Do you see yourself getting a fair trial?
No, I don't. The committee that put me to task is made up of a judge of the High Court who sits there, and also the DPP. At the material time, the DPP, the Director of Public Prosecution, was somebody called Biswalo Nganga, who I had been very critical and vocal about when I was president of Tanganyika Law Society. But further than that, even after my presidency, I made it very clear that he had been acting illegally for a prolonged period of time, abusing his position in office as the DPP by accusing people of non-bailable offenses. In Tanzania, we have things called non-bailable offenses, which are contrary really to the Constitution. They're contrary to our international obligations, but we still have them on the books. And once you're accused of these offenses, just an accusation bars you from ever having bail or applying for bail. Now, I was very critical with respect to the DPP, because he would charge people on politically motivated charges on non-bailable offenses. He would then have no evidence whatsoever to prosecute the case, and the cases would remain in abeyance for periods of 9 years. And he would go to court every 2 weeks and say investigations are incomplete, whilst people just remained in prison, remanded in prison without bail for periods of up to 9 years. This for me was unacceptable. It was an unacceptable abuse of his position and office, and an unacceptable abuse of people's rights. So I made it clear that he was behaving contrary to all manner of ethics as a prosecutor, including the law itself, the National Prosecutions Act. And he didn't like it. And this is the man who sat in judgment on me. Of course, he's going to remove me from the bar.
I'm really interested to hear a little bit more about this, because you do sound like you have no faith in the committee. But also additionally, let me just mention this fact that the Attorney General will one way or the other, the one that you are so vocal about, and perhaps your vocalness regarding his appointment brought you issues that led you to losing your position. What do you feel about the AG being involved in the committee?
So the Attorney General was the one who prosecuted me before this advocates committee. And you have to remember that I had taken a case against the Attorney General for being nominated and then appointed as an Attorney General contrary to the Constitution of the United Republic of Tanzania. Our Constitution provides that the Attorney General has to be a minimum 15 years call at the bar. And if he's not a private practitioner, he ought to have been minimum 15 years in practice as a state attorney. Adelardos Kilangi, our Attorney General, qualified for neither. He was neither called to the bar for 15 years, nor was he a state attorney for 15 years when he was appointed as Attorney General by the late President Magufuli. Now, there is a reason why the drafters of our Constitution wanted an Attorney General who had been called, was a senior of 15 years call, because one, experience, knowledge, confidence, the ability to stand in front of the president and tell the president that this is the law. Humility, because once you've been in practice, I have to say, for over 15 years, you're also very, very well aware that the more you know, that the more you need to learn. And the ability to advise, take advice, to also go into conference, all these are honed skills, and they take time to hone them. And unfortunately, Adelardos Kilangi did not have these qualifications and this experience. So when I took on the case, he didn't like it. He took it very, very personally. And as a result, he went out of his way to make sure that my name was removed from the role of advocates.
And do you feel like your name being removed from the role of advocates was actually you being targeted?
It was very personal. Of course, it was extremely personal. And I take it very, and for me, there isn't a scintilla of doubt about that. It was extremely personal. Instead of the Attorney General actually proving to the world and proving to Tanzania that he was qualified, he had the requisite qualifications to be an Attorney General, he decided to attack me personally.
Were there other lawyers you may know of, or you may have heard of their cases where they were actually targeted as much as also you were targeted?
The targeting is still continuing. The Attorney General has targeted 2 other lawyers, human rights advocates, and he's targeted them personally. And he's taken them before the Advocates Committee, or because they are vocal and they make a lot of noise about the illegalities that are continuing in Tanzania. And so the Attorney General is a very, very petty man who has decided to attack these 2 young lawyers and to take them to task.
Fatma, as I listen to you, the one question that's really lingering in my mind is, doesn't Tanzania have systems that can actually promote, defending of human rights, representation of any persons who are victims of the violation of human rights?
No. You see, our problem is, Tanzania's problem is not systems. Tanzania's problem is basically independence of these systems. We have a constitution that is extremely weak, that creates an imperial presidency. The president has powers to remove the Inspector General of Police, appoint a new Inspector General of Police. The president can appoint a new Chief Justice when and if she feels like it. So the Chief Justice doesn't have any security of tenure. The Chief Justice has security of tenure only with respect to his position as a judge of the Court of Appeal. But as a Chief Justice, he can be removed at any period of time by the president and a new Chief Justice appointed. You have the principal judges in the same position. All our judges are appointed and handpicked by the president. The law says that she can be advised by the Judicial Service Commission, but she doesn't have to heed the advice of the Judicial Service Commission. So we have a constitution that creates an imperial presidency. The Chief of Defense Forces is appointed by the president. The Chief of Security, the Tanzania Intelligence Service, is appointed by the president and can be removed by the president at will. So we have the chairman of the Electoral Commission is appointed by the president. I mean, anybody who is anybody within our systems is a presidential appointment. So the entire system is politicized to a point where our institutions cannot possibly be independent. And that, I think, is a great weakness.
Listening to you, it almost feels like the executive is ever interfering with the activities of the judiciary. So feels like there's not much independence with the judiciary in Tanzania.
No, the judiciary in Tanzania is not independent. It is not independent because the structure of the judiciary is not independent. You have to look at the structure. Structurally, our judiciary is financed entirely at the whim of the executive. So they rely on the executive to decide how much their budget should be. Normally, when you finance a judiciary, you should have a commission, and there should be a set sum that the judiciary should get from the total budget. Therefore, the judiciary is never at risk of being penalized for making decisions which are contrary to the policies or the wishes of the executive. But this is not so in Tanzania. The judiciary is completely subject to the whims so far as, let's say, the judiciary's budget is concerned. It is completely subject to the whims of the executive. The other problem with the judiciary is the appointment mechanisms. Judges are nominated and appointed by the same person. Guess who? The President of the United Republic of Tanzania. They are not necessarily given any tests. We don't know. There's no transparency in the appointment process. I mean, unlike in Kenya, what you have is there are judges, prospective judges are interviewed, the public are given a say, the public are told to give their views on these prospective judges. This is not the case in Tanzania. It is a completely opaque appointment process. We don't know why and how these people are appointed and what makes them so qualified as to be appointed. So yeah, we have a big problem. So the whole structure of the judiciary is not set out to be independent.
So just, I want us to take a look at a little bit about the rule of law in Tanzania. I know we've talked extensively, well, a little bit more about the judiciary and the independence of the judiciary. And before even we move to the rule of law, I'd like to hear from you. What do you think is the solution? Sounds like the executive is interfering a lot with the appointments in your country, from leadership, from judges, from, members of parliament. So what would you say is the solution to this particular issue?
I think we don't have a choice but to have a new constitution. We have to relook at our constitution. The interference that's coming from the executive is an interference that has been sewn into the constitution itself. This is not interference that, you can say, well, the executive are interfering contrary to the constitution. They're interfering because the constitution allows the executive and permits the executive to have this type of role.
Not too long ago, we heard of, a story where some activists were trying to push for the constitutional review in your country being caught and basically sounded like some sort of intimidation. How important is constitutional reforms in your country?
Constitutional reforms in our country are extremely important. And this is a subject that I understand the new president, Samia Suluhu Hassan, has broached, and she has said it's not on her list of priorities, but I think it ought to be on her list of priorities. It's a low-hanging fruit. It's one of the things that what the last 5 years have shown the world is how easily Tanzania can regress into dictatorship, and how easily institutions can just crumble around. Nobody, Leah, is going to put their money in a country that is that insecure, that relies entirely on a president and a president's whim. Nobody's going to come and invest in this country. And they would be unwise to put their money there. I mean, people like me who have lived in Tanzania for a long period of time, for the last 25 years or so, and have invested heavily in the country. I've invested everything I've earned in Tanzania. I start regretting, because I didn't believe that our systems and our institutions would crumble so quickly in a period of 5 years like they did. So my advice to anybody is, do not put your money into this country, for the simple reason that until such time as we can create institutions that are not dependent on one person and the whims and will of one person, it's not a safe environment. It's not safe for me, it's not safe for them, it's not safe for our children, our grandchildren, and therefore it is essential that the President of the United Republic of Tanzania, to protect her own children, to protect her own family, to protect her relatives, her grandchildren, she creates a system that that is fair, a system that takes power away from the president and diversifies this power and to institutions.
Let's just take a look a little bit into the rule of law. I'll take you back. When the late president, John Magufuli, was at the helm of presidency, I mean, it was perceived as though he actually did try to undermine the rule of law in your country. Do you think this is the case?
Yes, that's what dictators do, Leah. Dictators don't want to be ruled by law. They want to be the law. They want to rule. They do not want to be subject to any higher authority. And the concept of rule of law is that there is a higher authority, and the higher authority is the law of the land. And but not only the law of the land, there is a concept in rule of law that there are sort of these inalienable rights which are higher than even the law of the land. So if you create a law that you pass a law in parliament that contravenes human rights and inalienable rights, then that law does not stand. Now, a dictator doesn't want that. A dictator wants to decree, wants to say, when I say you do X, Y, Z, I want 60 million people to do X, Y, Z. And that was John Pombe Magufuli. He didn't want to be subject to a higher law or a higher power. He saw himself as the higher power, and we were all subject to him. And we saw how our institutions crumbled and accepted this in 5 years.
Clearly, you are saying that you feel that the late President, John Magufuli, was a dictator. And I would like to hear from you.
I don't feel it, Leah. I don't feel it, Leah. I know it. I know it as a fact. This is not a feeling. This is it's a simple analysis of his actions, his conduct. I spent 5 years studying him, seeing what he says, listening to what he says, looking at his actions and his behavior. And my conclusion was he was innately dictatorial, and he abused the Constitution, and he abused his position as President of the United Republic of Tanzania.
What impact do you think his actions had on the nation?
a terrible impact. I think it left a lot of us traumatized. It left a traumatized and very scared nation. That is from let's say from the a feeling of how we felt. But I think if we look at the economy of the country, it went on a downward trajectory. Investments were not coming in. There was no creation of jobs, although government propaganda said they had created over 8 million jobs. I mean, that's laughable. They claimed they created 8 million jobs in a population of 60 million. And yet the statistics say 2 million Tanzanians in the period, in the 5 years that Magufuli was in power, 2 more million Tanzanians fell into abject poverty. I mean, it's ridiculous. And this is a government that says it created 8 million jobs.
Some personalities in your country, such as, the former Controller and Auditor General, Professor Musa Assad, feel that there's a lot of corruption in the public sector. Some people don't deserve to be holding the positions they are holding because they are not competent. What are your views on the public sector, which is said to have been that one area where the late President Magufuli took advantage, perhaps, as some say, and hired on the basis of his own gain?
The public sector in Tanzania has been irreparably damaged over a prolonged period of time. We have professional civil servants, but unfortunately, they're not respected. They're not given their due respect. They're not. They're treated extremely poorly, what happens is the civil service has been inundated or penetrated through the use of political appointments by members of a CCM. So you will find that a member of CCM will be appointed as a district executive director. The position of a district executive director is a civil service position, and yet these positions have been politicized. Permanent secretaries are very high-ranking civil servants. These positions, again, are politicized. They have been politicized. And this is disturbing because it destroys the heart of the civil service. A civil service is supposed to be independent. It's supposed to be professional. And our civil service, because of politicization of the civil service by CCM, has become a civil service that is not professional, and it's not working for the country.
All this sounds like it's rooted from way above the presidency. And you mentioned that the presidency is so powerful in your country that the appointments go without any kind of debate in parliament. What can you say about the separation of power between the judiciary, the executive, and other bodies that are supposed to aid in the appointment of candidates that you can actually call are qualified for whatever position?
There is very little, in an imperial presidency, there's very little separation of power. Because that's the whole point. They created the Constitution, the 1977 Constitution was created. So let's go back to why we had the 1977 Constitution. The 1977 Constitution, which is a constitution we still have to date, was created for the purpose of putting in place a one-party system and creating CCM supremacy. So Parliament was actually, under the 1977 Constitution, subject to the National Executive Committee of the ruling party, the CCM. There was no independence of the judiciary. The 1977 Constitution was not created so that there's a balance of power. The 1977 Constitution was drafted for the purpose of creating a state where supreme power rested in CCM. And that has never really changed. They sort of, amended parts of the constitution, added, put plasters on it. But ultimately, the very heart of the constitution was to create party supremacy, as a party that is supreme even above the state. And it succeeded to do this. We have never managed to wrestle ourselves from this, this phenomenon.
So then what's the answer? I mean, if the people in your country, the activists who are trying to push for constitutional amendment in your country are being gagged from a position of intimidation, being caught by authorities in your country, then what really is the way forward for your country? What are your thoughts about this?
We really don't have a choice but to come up with a new constitution. Constitutional reform has to take place. We cannot keep plastering over this wound, this 1977 wound, that is festering there, that is creating so much injustice indefinitely. We have to go to the heart of it and say, let's take another look at our country. And a constitutional reform process had begun. It began under Kikwete. Unfortunately, the CCM did not like what the people wanted. And there was a process in which a committee was set up to discuss, that traveled the country widely and gathered views from people all over the country about how they saw what they wanted of their country and what they wanted their Grundnorms to be. And people came out en masse and they did participate. It was a very participatory process. And their views were that they wanted presidential powers to be limited. And they wanted a government in Tanzania to have a federal state where the United Republic of Tanzania was the federal government. Zanzibar should have its own government, and Tanganyika should have its own government. Of course, this separation of the executive into three branches like this was not pleasing for CCM. And we had a lot of pushback from CCM. But, they cannot keep pushing back indefinitely. At some point, they're going to have to realize that their game is up. They cannot be supreme forever. They have to play fair.
We have seen political activists in your country talk about Freeman Mbowe, talk about Tundu Lissu, whom you represented in one of the cases in which she was facing a particular issue that was brought against him in court. I mean, they have really tried to push for these constitutional reforms and, a change in how the presidency is handling human rights issues in your country. Do you think there's hope for these constitutional reforms that are much needed, as you say?
They will come. There is just no doubt about it. Look, when you look at how CCM have been playing it, in 2014, Kikwete he realized there was a need for constitutional reform, and therefore he set up this committee and went out and gathered views. They didn't like the views that they got back from the people, and therefore pushed back and didn't reform the constitution. But the fact that they didn't reform the constitution meant that between 2015 and 2020, we paid heavily, extremely heavily, for the country. Even CCM itself and members of CCM paid heavily, paid a heavy price under this present constitution, because I don't think they realized how noxious and how weak this constitution is, and how noxious imperial presidencies are, until they had a president who was innately a dictator, and who lacked empathy. And so they paid heavily. A lot of them paid a heavy price, I can tell you that much.
Listening to you, and I know this has been an issue, Tundu Lissu literally had to leave the country Freeman Mbowe also, at some point, he did have to leave the country for the safety of their own lives. I mean, we are also seeing you, who's very vocal, and at some point you were so vocal against the late President John Magufuli that you were literally almost appearing to be at loggerheads with him. What would you make of the treatment of the opposition figures or personalities in your country?
It has been shameful. There are lots of people who should be absolutely ashamed of themselves. It's been appalling, the kind of treatment that the opposition have had. They have been criminalized just for being members of the opposition. And when they were not criminalized, and when criminalizing them did not suffice, they were shot or stabbed, or their legs were broken, their assets taken away from them. You look at someone like Freeman Mbowe. I mean, we all know about Tundu. He was shot, his car was shot 36 times. He had 16 bullets pumped into his body. Now, there are other members of the opposition who were stabbed. Others were have disappeared. Freeman Mbowe's legs were broken. His leg was broken. His assets were burnt. I mean, it's appalling. What happened in the last 5 years is just criminal. To do this to people at one point, all the top ranking members of the opposition, the biggest opposition party in Tanzania, Chadema, they were all in prison. How is this possible? You know, for ridiculous charges, I don't know, sedition and all manner of nonsense. And somehow Magufuli got away with this. And I say he got away with it because there were members of the judiciary who actually endorsed his actions, enforced them, and there were others who apologized. And this was not acceptable. For me, it's a situation that should never repeat itself, because opposition is a constitutional right. Democracy has been drafted even in our weak constitution. It is there, and everybody has a right to oppose government. We don't have to. No, we don't have to like CCM.
You have a new president now who has been installed in your country, President Samia Suluhu. You've mentioned the fact that the executive has very much interfered with the independence of the judiciary in your country. We do know that there was a report that went out that Chadema will likely have a meeting with the president. Do you think this is set to take place? Will it actually happen? Do you think so?
I don't know. I mean, it's been 100 days of Samia Suluhu's presidency, and she has not met up with Chadema yet. I hope she does meet up with the opposition. I hope she does talk to them. Look, democracy is not about creating views, entrenching them, and not being able to meet across the trench. They should be able to talk to one another. The president should make time to talk to the members of the opposition, because we have to remember one thing: irrespective of what CCM thinks, these people have the support of the people. If a party has 30–40% support, this is a force to be reckoned with, not only because of the power, but the fact that they represent 40% of the population. You must speak to them. By not speaking to them, you're ignoring 40% of the population. When you become president, you're not president for the 60% that voted you in, or the 56% that voted you in. You're the president of the entire population. And therefore, you have to get views from those who represent the others. And, once you're the president, you're no longer CCM. you are leading a government that a system that puts out system policies that will adhere to system policies. But you're the president of the United Republic of Tanzania. You're the president of people who support you and those who don't support you. So it's really important that you speak to those who don't support you. So I hope she does.
Fatma, I want us to move away from the whole idea of the presidency and the judiciary. So one of the things I know you're very passionate about is the human rights. And let's just talk about the pregnant girls and how they were handled under the presidency of the late John Magufuli. You are very vocal about this. What's the status right now in the handling of pregnant girls, teenage girls in this case?
Okay, so during the Magufuli era, look, let's go back to the CCM manifesto. When Magufuli came into power, the CCM manifesto said that they would pass a law allowing schoolgirls who got pregnant whilst in school to go back to school after they'd had their children. Magufuli comes into power. He stands up and he says he will not allow girls, schoolgirls, these are 13, 14, 15-year-olds who are impregnated to go back to school after they've had their children. He says schools are not for mothers. Schools are for children. And these children are no longer children. They're now mothers. Now, this is of course not true, because under our law, you don't become an adult until you turn 18. You still remain a child when you're under 18. Secondly, a lot of these young girls get pregnant because they're raped by members of family, by outsiders. Even if they were not raped and they were experimenting, a 12-year-old, 13-year-old is experimenting and happens to be pregnant. The solution is not to expel them from school, because by expelling these young girls from school, you are ensuring that they remain poor forever. How do you expect them to earn a living when you take away their right to education? They have a right to be educated by the state. They have a right not to be discriminated because of their sex. Now, you know, the young man who has sex with them, let's say a 13-year-old has sex with a 14-year-old, the young man remains in school. And the young boy remains in school and is allowed to continue school. But the young girl gets penalized for having a uterus. Now, this is just appalling. It's outrageous. You know? It's just misogynism of the highest order, and it's not acceptable.
Talk about the LGBTQ community. We do know that the handling of this community has not been so favorable in your country. Some have come out saying they have been harassed. And it's also an issue we're seeing in Uganda. It's an issue we're also seeing in Ghana. What do you think, you know, what would you say about the handling of the LGBTQ community, not just in your country, but even across the African continent?
I have met homosexuals who come from villages, born in a village, never left the village, didn't understand why they were attracted to their own sex. And I would speak to them and I'd say, really, you came from a village? Yes, absolutely, from the village. And pure Africans, these are not sort of, you know, of mixed race or absolute Africa, 100% Bantu. And so to suggest that this is some kind of European scourge is absolute nonsense. It's human nature. Homosexuality is part of humanity. It always has been there and it should always be there. So we either accept it. Actually, we don't have a choice but to accept it because it's part of the human condition. You know, there are going to be some who will be different from us. There's spectrum. there is a spectrum, and human beings, we're not manufactured in a factory where a Mercedes car comes out the same, but with different colors, and different interior, but the engine is the same. With respect, if you buy a Mercedes, let's say a C-Class, C220, whatever, you find it's the same car. We're not like that. We are so different, and genetics are so complicated, and most of the time, so we have to embrace the difference that human beings have, and we shouldn't look upon difference as something to exclude other people. Nature is so complex that to think that when someone stands up and says, this is un-African, this is somebody who clearly doesn't even comprehend the complexity of nature, and it comes from a position of ignorance.
So would you say there are laws in place in your country that are able to protect the rights of the LGBTQ community?
Yes, we have in the Constitution a right to privacy. But on the other hand, we have in our penal code, we've criminalized sodomy. So these two things are incompatible. You cannot possibly have a right to privacy and yet criminalize sodomy, because, well, most people who sort of, what happens in someone's bedroom should remain in someone's bedroom, so yeah, so what is being used against homosexuals in Tanzania, not lesbians, homosexuals, is this law against sodomy. The problem with it, of course, is that how do you prove that somebody is sodomized or not within the privacy of their own bedroom, or practices sodomy? And we all know also that men and women practice sodomy too. That, by the way, the criminalization of sodomy is not related to the sex of the person. So it's criminalized even between men and women. But it is very strange that somehow the state should get involved in people's private business, in their private homes and in their bedrooms.
There has been a feeling that in your country there's not a lot of media freedom. What are your thoughts about the current status?
It's not about in my country there not being a lot of media freedom. The country has been run by a party that has feared any sort of dissent from anybody. It has consistently feared the media. We have to go back to the history of the United Republic of Tanzania. The first thing that Nyerere did after he established a one-party state in 1962, one of the first things he did was to nationalize the Standard newspaper and turn it into the Daily News. We had lists of books that Tanzanians were not allowed to read. It sounds completely unbelievable when I say it in today's, today. But this is our history. He passed the Newspaper Act, which prohibited, which was so repressive and prohibited free speech. I mean, this is our history, and it has continued. They've now passed the Media Services Act. It's not much better. I mean, we've consistently had a government that is being run by CCM in one form or another. It started off with TAN when ASP and then became CCM, the two merged into CCM in 1977. That they're so scared of different views. Not that their views are very good, by the way. Let's get that very clear. You know, we have a lot of issues and questions about their views, very concerning and disconcerting their views are, but they're very fearful about freedom of expression and freedom of speech and freedom of the media. So this has to change. It has to change because human beings evolved through exchanges of views and ideas.
Given that now you have a new president in place in your country, do you think there is a chance that there will be evident, or rather the media will be able to enjoy more freedom as opposed to what was there during the tenure of the late President John Magufuli?
Samia Suluhu Hassan, when she became president, she made it very clear that she wanted the media to be given more space to maneuver. Again, it shouldn't be, media freedom should not be at the will of the president. It should be a right. It should be in the Constitution. It should be in the laws. The president should not be able to determine how much freedom the media should have. And so when you see a country that moves from repressive regulations or a repression of the media to freeing of the media, slight freeing of the media over a period of 2 weeks because the president died and a new president comes in, it is indicative, and you can be sure that this is a country that is not run by law. It is run by the will and the whims of one person, and that is the president of the United Republic of Tanzania. Be this president a good person or a bad person? That this is scary. This is not how a country should be run.
Fatma, are you saying there are no bodies in your country or institutions that are mandated to protect the journalistic rights?
No, we don't have those. It got so bad under Magufuli that to be a journalist, you now have to be registered. And so if you are somebody who writes something they don't like, they can take away your practicing license as a journalist. And this is ridiculous. But why should a journalist have to be registered with a body? Anybody, this is just another form of control there. And it's a way to control what people write, what people say. It's the same way, they use licensing to control you.
We've talked about the opposition. You've talked about the silencing of the opposition in your country. We have talked about the media freedom that is not much in your country. In fact, you say that there are no institutions that are mandated to protect journalistic rights. Then how is the government of your country kept accountable?
That's the whole point of a dictatorship. It doesn't want to be held accountable to anybody. And I think I said this at the very beginning. Magufuli wanted to be the law. He wanted to be somebody who was not held to account by anybody. And it's the same with CCM. CCM does not want to be held accountable by the people, by the law. And I think I explained that. It set itself up to be supreme. Now, it's up to us as Tanzanians, I think, to fight for a country where nobody is above the law. No political party is above the law. And the president shouldn't be above the law. The president shouldn't be the law and shouldn't be above the law. Magufuli tried to create a presidency that was the law. And he thought he was above the law. But it's up to us as a people to say, no, we're all equal, because we are a republic. We're not a monarchy.
Given the fact that you say that the presidency often, if not most times, interferes with the independence of the judiciary and other relevant institutions in your country, would you say that Tanzania is one country that is able to have free and fair election at any one point?
No. The elections in Tanzania have never been free and fair. There are lots of reasons for this. Again, the National Electoral Commission is not an independent commission, despite the fact that the Constitution calls for it to be independent. The returning officers of the National Electoral Commission are all appointed by the president. They're actually the district executive directors, and they're appointed by the president. The chairman of the National Electoral Commission is appointed by the president. The director of national elections is appointed by the president. There is no scrutinizing his appointment process. There's no scrutiny over the quality and the caliber of the appointees and the independence of the appointees. In actual fact, the director of the National Electoral Commission, the present director, is a CCM party member and had run for elections under CCM and had lost. So you have a system where you can see that our institutions are not at all independent, including the National Electoral Commission. And this is a case I had taken again as a constitutional case. I won in the High Court. The High Court did say that the National Electoral Commission was not independent because its returning officers were not independent. They ought not to have been appointed by the president. It's against the Constitution. When we went to the Court of Appeal said no, it didn't matter. The president can appoint whoever he wants as a returning officer, so long as the returning officer swore an oath to remain independent. I mean, this is a complete misunderstanding about the doctrine of independence, of course, and the Court of Appeal decided to apply it erroneously, and it suited them politically. But the truth of the matter is, we will keep having extremely violent election cycles so long as people do not have confidence in the National Electoral Commission, and so long as CCM wants to retain power by whatever means necessary. And these violent election cycles will continue.
So President Samia Suluhu is approaching 100 days in office. If you were to rate her, what will that rate look like?
I'd give her a 7 out of 10. I mean, I'm really, really very impressed with her so far. She's done very well. She's a woman who has inherited a country that was divided, deeply divided. The fissures that was left behind by Magufuli were even present within her own party. And she had to deal with this division in the country. I think she can still do better and bring the country together. That's why I'm giving her 7 out of 10 with respect to that. International relations, I would give her an 8 out of 10. I think she's done very well with that. She got rid of Palamagamba Kabudi, appointed, who is not at all diplomatic, appointed a seasoned diplomat, Mula, and she's spent a lot of time visiting our neighbors. You know, we do a lot of business with Kenya. In fact, our balance of trade with Kenya is positive. We sell more to Kenya than Kenya sells to us, believe it or not. And she went and she came to visit Kenyatta, and she's re-established our trading relations with Kenya. And that's fantastic. She's been to visit Uganda. She's recently been to Maputo, and she's been present at international meetings through Zoom or however they do them now. So she's done a really good job with respect to international relations, and she's putting Tanzania back on the map as a country that is prepared to do business with the outside world and to communicate with the outside world. With respect to law and order, or let's say human rights within Tanzania, I would give her a 5 out of 10. I don't think she's put enough effort in that. She still needs to look at her Ministry of Justice. She needs to look at the judiciary. She needs to look at how to change the laws to create a better environment with respect to freedom of the press, freedom of expression, human rights, and also the rule of law. So she really needs to take a look at that. With respect to the economy, I think she's trying. I would give her a 7 out of 10. She has tried to create confidence in investors and the people. She's pulled back on the oppressive measures which were being taken by the TRA. So I think she's done very well there, except she still needs to look at laws. She needs to change laws to give confidence to the investor community. So all in all, she hasn't done too badly. I think she's done really, really well. And I'm proud of her. I'm really proud of her.
Let's talk about COVID-19.
Maybe because she's a woman as well, Leah. Maybe because she's a woman as well. I really am proud of her.
All right, power to the women. Well, you know what? I mean, when we look at COVID-19, so many of the citizens, well, if not the entire country, perhaps, you know, majority of the people in your country did believe, or some may even still believe, that COVID-19 does not exist. But we've seen President Samia Suluhu trying to make some effort to address COVID-19 in your country. What would you say in regards to her handling of COVID-19 at this moment?
9 out of 10. I give her 9 out of 10. That is something that she has done phenomenally well with. There is still, you know, she came into power in a country which had created COVID-19 denialism. We have a Ministry of Health that didn't believe in the science of COVID-19. We have a Minister of Health that was going around the country telling people to use steam inhalation to get rid of COVID-19. I would give her 9 out of 10 because she took the country back to science. She took advice from scientists. She set up a commission for the purpose of advising her. The commission came up with a report, and we're heading back towards WHO recommendations, which is fantastic. I give her 9 out of 10 because I think she should get rid of the Minister of Health. You cannot, the Minister of Health cannot run a scientific program. She just doesn't have the credibility to run a program against COVID that is based on science, because this is the same woman who was running around the country making an absolute fool of herself with her husband, inhaling steam and eating lemons and I don't know, papayas and whatever else she was consuming, and convincing the populace in Tanzania that this is one way of dealing with COVID-19. I mean, you know, she just doesn't have the credibility anymore to run a ministry of health against a pandemic, a worldwide pandemic like COVID. I think the president, and that's why I would give her 9 out of 10. She needs to reconsider who she wants in that position and who reflects her views and who will have the credibility of running a program against this pandemic.
Fatma, as we near the end of our conversation today, the British heritage influence on the judicial system of your country, what can you say about this?
The British, what did you say?
The British heritage, talking about the colonial times in your country, the impact of the presence of the British in your country during the colonial era. What do you think the impact has been on the judicial system or just the legal framework of your country?
The impact of the colonial era has been, there's been a positive and a negative impact. So the negative impact is the creation of this this imperial presidency, because what happened immediately after independence, we were given a constitution, a, 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 a Westminster constitution, like all other independent countries that got their independence from Britain. The Westminster Constitution set up the governor as the representative of the Queen, and the Queen was head of state. And the governor then had all these imperial powers, actually, to appoint the IGP and all these other powers. And we then had a Westminster system of governance where the prime minister would run government on at the invitation of the governor who represented the Queen. We have to remember that the governor or the Queen is not a politician and has no political bias in any way, is apolitical, actually. What happened is when we became a republic, we just replaced the governor with the president and gave the president all the power that the governor had, forgetting and being completely ignorant of the fact that the governor who represented the Queen was apolitical, but the president is not apolitical. The president comes from a political party and therefore cannot possibly be allowed to appoint the plethora of positions that the governor had to appoint. And that's how we created an imperial presidency, knowingly or unknowingly, because actually we came from an imperial system, where the Queen, the monarch, was at the top, the head of state, and had all these powers. And so it wasn't the imperial presidency was not a mistake. It was it is part of our history. We just replaced the monarch with the president and then created an imperial presidency. And we've got to change that. Without changing that, we will continue to be subjects to a president. And there's a difference between being subjects to a constitutional monarch and subject to a presidency, a constitutional presidency, imperial presidency. A constitutional monarch has no political power and is apolitical. An imperial president has immense political power and is political and comes from a political party. And that is the distinction. And this is something we have to rid ourselves of.
Fatma, given the different things we've talked about in regards to your country, what would you say is your ideal Tanzania? That dream you have for Tanzania?
My ideal Tanzania, I would love to see a Tanzania which is a federal republic of Tanzania with 3 governments, a Tanzania with the government of Tanganyika, government of Zanzibar, and the government of the United Republic of Tanzania. I'd like to see a Tanzania where the imperial presidency is diluted, the powers of the imperial presidency are diluted. I'd like to see a Tanzania that takes the powers back to the people, a democratic Tanzania that respects human rights, that respects where politicians are held accountable, a Tanzania where there is separation of powers, the judiciary is independent, a Tanzania in which the judiciary is professional, independent, and respected, and very, very competent. I would like to see a Tanzania where the executive is held to account, and there's a balance of power between the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. So, I mean, my dreams are big. I think my list is just, but it's possible. It's possible, and the people of the United Republic of Tanzania are just wonderful, very peaceful people, peace-loving, kind, humorous. And I think they deserve a country that reflects who they are, without this sort of violence brutality, police brutality that is consistently meted out against them. Yeah, so that's what I'd like to see there.
Given that the role of any president is to drive the agenda that is supposed to benefit the common citizen whom the president is leading, if you were to be addressing the president, Samia Suluhu, at this moment, what would be your message?
If I were to address the President of the United Republic of Tanzania at this moment, my message would be, you've done so well. You make us proud. You are somebody with immense patience, with immense humility. And you really have made us proud. You have taken on realms of the reins of power in a very difficult scenario and situation. But there are challenges ahead of you, and you've dealt with the challenges so far so good. But you could change. You have the ability to change the landscape of Tanzania and to leave your mark, and to be remembered for years and years to come. Seize that opportunity and don't be scared of it. You will be fine. It's time for you to make your mark. And you have been fortunate, extremely fortunate, to be able to see the history of Tanzania. There was a reason why you sat as Speaker during the Constituent Assembly. Do what your destiny is. Your destiny is to amend the Constitution of the United Republic of Tanzania and to pass that through. There's a reason why. She sat as Deputy Speaker during the Constituent Assembly in 2014. And I think there's a reason why that's her destiny, and she ought to amend the Constitution of the United Republic of Tanzania. She ought to finish the job she started.
Fatma Karume, such an interesting conversation I've had with you today. We appreciate your time and giving us such great insight as far as Tanzania is concerned, from human rights to the Constitution to different things that we've talked about. Thank you for making time.
Thank you so much, Leah. It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, that has been a conversation with the former president of the Tanganyika Law Society, and her name is Fatma Karume. My name is Leah Ngari. Until next time, stay tuned to Mwanzo TV. Thank you for watching.